there's this cool new feature that came out in the ACI 6.2.1 release, and it has to do with something that I've been waiting for a long time, and that is the ability to mix physical and virtual APICs in the same cluster at the same time. So let's dig in. Okay, so if you look at the release notes from ACI 6.2.1, which is shipping now as of January 2026, you will see this cool new feature among many other cool features about the hybrid APIC cluster. And you can see the text here that we can now properly mix them all in any format that we want, in any mixture that we want, except for a couple of caveats, like not the ones on AWS, not ACI Mini. Obviously, you want to click on that link about the Getting Started guide to read more information about it. But I'm very excited to be able to deploy this in my lab and show it to you. Okay, so if we are talking about mixing physical APICs and virtual APICs, the first question that probably comes to mind is this a greenfield only situation, or can I do this in brownfield? And the short answer is you can do it in both. But the real consideration comes when you think about brownfield. How do we handle that cluster? Because we're starting with 3 physical APICs, and now we're moving to potentially some mixture of some physical and some virtual, or even all virtual if you want. Okay, so the good thing to maybe go back in time and point out is in an earlier release of ACI 6.1.1, we enabled a feature that allowed you to seamlessly migrate from physical APICs to virtual APICs. Like that was, basically migrating everything all at once. And you could go physical to virtual, or in reverse, virtual to physical. And I have a little matrix there on the bottom that shows the supported migration path. And really the thing you need to remember is if you have a medium or M size APIC, you need to migrate to the equivalent virtual or physical M size. And the same is true of large and so on. So keep that in mind. The real next question goes, well, wait a minute, in 6.1.1, if I did that migration, it's really an all or nothing situation. But in my case, now with 6.2.1, I only want to virtualize maybe 2 of my 3 APICs, but not all of them. So what do I do in that situation? And I have good news for you. So in 6.2.1, I'm not going to give you one method. I'm actually going to give you 2 possible methods. And I'll tell you which one I'm going to use for the rest of this video. So the first one is, we can still use that existing migration workflow that ACI 6.1.1 brought us, but we can kind of cleverly set it up in a way that we only migrate some of the devices and not others. And that process, or that ability to do that, it wasn't really obvious to me. So that's why I decided to create this video, so I could not only show the feature, but show you how to do it. So in a nutshell, and I'll show you this live, is we're going to migrate to self, is what I call it, my own term, for those APICs that we don't want to migrate. But because the migration logic is all or nothing, we kind of have to say migrate to self. And then the other ones that we do want to migrate, will migrate to, the other APIC. The second method, which I'm not going to show in this video, is you can do the traditional, well, if I've got 3 physical APICs, I'll decommission APIC number 3, I'll replace it. I'll spin up a virtual APIC and I'll replace it, kind of like I'm doing an RMA, or I call it a virtual RMA. It's like you're just replacing an APIC and it just happens to now be virtual instead of physical. You can do that. That will work. When would you use that one? Well, if you want to do this one APIC at a time, or you want tight control over just migrating one APIC at a time. Whereas if you compare it to the migration workflow, that says, hey, we can do 1, 2, or all in the process. And you might not want to do that all at once, but they're both perfectly fine. Don't worry, you have a choice. Now in my video, I'm using the first method because I think that's probably the easiest with the least amount of steps. And so that's what I'll show you. Okay, just like anything that I talk about in these videos, there's always some design guidelines, considerations that I want to make you aware of before you start. You always want to read the online docs. I think that's a given. But a couple of highlights I wanted to point out is you can only migrate layer 2 attached APICs to layer 2 attached APICs, physical or virtual, or layer 3 to layer 3. You can't mix layer 2 and layer 3. So just keep that in mind. Make sure your sizing matches. So if you have an existing physical M series APIC, you want to do a virtual M series APIC, and large to large, etc. You get that. And it was in that matrix I showed you a couple of seconds ago. Just make sure that they match or it won't work. The admin password of your cluster, your existing cluster, is going to be the one you're going to use when you spin up in my case, the virtual APIC cluster, and I'll show you that. Also be aware that there's no support for standby APIC nodes. So before you do this type of migration, remove the standby node from your setup, then migrate and then bring it back. Obviously, don't do this migration if there's a software upgrade in process. I think that's kind of obvious, but you never know what people might try. So, obviously check there's not somebody else doing a software upgrade while you're doing this migration. And there's a couple more. When you're migrating, you're actually going to be migrating to a new device. So that device will have its own unique out-of-band IP management address. So if you have any services that are invoking or using that connection over out-of-band IP, you'll obviously have to update them. Those could be firewall rules, syslog server, allowed list. The other good example is if you're using a Nexus dashboard orchestrator, and by this I mean the pre-Nexus dashboard is if you have multi-site, it uses NDO uses the out-of-band IP of APIC to push the changes. You'll obviously have to update NDO to make it aware of that change. Next, be aware that if you have ACI Mini, I don't know if anyone's using ACI Mini anymore, but if you are, we don't support that type of migration here. It's just not supported, so be aware. Obviously, in my case, because I'm going from physical APICs to potentially some virtual APICs, we want to deploy those vAPICs ahead of time with the day zero setup. And what I mean is basically you have an admin account and password and an out-of-band management IP, and that's pretty much it. You don't do any other setup. And then lastly, because we're using virtual, and in my case, it's a layer 2 direct connected, I'm assuming that you know how to create those port groups for out-of-band and infra in vCenter. But in case you don't, in the highlights, I took some screenshots from mine because I've already spun up my vAPICs to save time, is as you go through deploying the OVF template, you obviously want to pick your size. And in my case, I have APIC M4, I think. So I'm going to be migrating to a virtual APIC M1. Those are compatible, right? In my particular case, just make sure yours matches your conditions. In the next consideration, obviously, you need to pick your out-of-band management port group and have that configured ahead of time. And the other more important one is the infra network. This is where the APIC itself connects directly to your leaf, this L2 leaf in my case. You want to make sure that that is set up. So I took a little insert screenshot you see there at the bottom. Make sure that the VLAN setting is the infra VLAN setting that your current fabric is using. In my fabric, I happen to choose VLAN 3, 4, 5, 6. Yours may be different, so make sure that those match. And when you build this port group in vCenter and assign it to the VM, just make sure that you're seeing those trunks. You're probably also quickly wondering, what's that extra VLAN 11 doing? In my case, it's the VLAN that I use for in-band management. I'm not going to go into the details of setting up in-band management here, but if you use in-band management, then you'll obviously want to trunk that VLAN as well to your vAPICs. Okay, and then the last thing to consider here is the password that you set here has to be the existing admin account password of your currently running brownfield fabric. They must match. And then the last thing to consider is the out-of-band IP address of each of the APICs must be unique. Again, I think that's obvious, but this is where I mentioned the IP was changing and you might need to update other services to be aware of that. Okay, let's quickly look at my lab topology. Now, when you see me go through this live, you're going to notice a couple things. I only have one physical APIC. I have one physical APIC and two virtual APICs, but for the sake of this video, let's pretend that they're all three physical APICs because there's pretty much no difference, right? I want to be able to show the migration, I just don't have three physical APICs in my lab. The process is identical, as I said, we just don't have to invoke the SIMC as part of the migration. I'll show you what that looks like on the screen so you're kind of aware of it when you have your three physical APICs and you want to migrate one or two of those to virtual APICs. It's the same process, so don't worry, it's enough to show what that looks like. Also keep in mind that with this workflow, you can migrate one APIC, two APICs, or all three APICs all at once. So that's kind of the nice, let's say, benefit of using this workflow is you can kind of do it all in one fell swoop. In my example, I'm only going to be migrating one APIC, so APIC 3A that you see there. It has an IP address. I'm going to migrate it to APIC 3B. Now, just again, pretend that those are physical APICs because the look and feel is identical. For the sake of this video, okay? So now you know my lab topology. Let's actually switch to the second part of this video and I'll do it live in my lab so you can see what it looks like and you can follow suit.